Turn to John 13, Gospel of John, chapter 13. We'll start reading at verse 1. You may want to put your ribbon there as we'll come back to that text a time or two during the sermon. John 13, starting at verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, the devil having put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper, laid aside his garment, taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter. He said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, What do you need? What I do you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. Peter said to him, Never shall you wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. And Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, He who has bathed needs only wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew the one who was betraying him. For this reason he said, Not all of you are clean. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garment and reclined at the table again, he said to them, Do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you ought to also wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you should also do as I did to you. This is our text. We look at life and we see some life-changing moments, and often those life-changing moments are major, they're phenomenal, they're the big ones that make headlines, so to speak. And then there are the life-changing moments that are small and apparently rather incidental. But I would suggest to you that this, for the disciples, was one of those life-changing moments when their master, the one they had seen calm the storm, raise the dead, and work miracles and feed the thousands on more than one occasion, knelt down at their feet as a bondservant, being the lowest level of servitude, and began to wash. And I would also suggest to you that this is not the first time Jesus knelt, because in Philippians 2, verse 5 through 7, we read that he, being the form of God, did not count it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no account and took on the form of a bond servant. And thus he knelt in a sense and served all humanity. So Jesus models humility for us. He opens up the heart of the divine, and he shows us what is in the heart of God and what we as his disciples ought to have welling up in our hearts. Also, that same model of humble servitude to others, to the business of the Father. And so we look into that. And in Matthew 20:28 is where he said he did not come to be served, but to serve. And that is the model that he left us, and that is the point of our lesson this morning. So number one, Jesus redefined leadership and redefined it quite well. Earthly power has the idea of leadership. It may be at the head of the table in the corporate room. It may be in the headquarters of some military establishment, or perhaps it's on the stage in front of thousands of raging fans, or on the football field in front of many, many raging fans. And when your world thinks of a power and leadership, that's the direction we look. But when God thinks of leadership, the direction he looks flips all of that upside down, doesn't it? And he has the one through whom the world was created, the one who sustains and holds the world together by his very being, kneels down and washes the feet of his own servants the ones he came to die for. That's a totally different concept. And the challenge for you and I is that since we are in the flesh and we deal with the flesh and we communicate through the flesh, learning to think in the Spirit and to have the heart of Christ becomes rather difficult. John 13:14, we just read it. Look back at it just a second. He said, you also ought to wash one another's feet. There's our leadership. Again, challenges our fleshly instincts. Power to us is something completely different than that humble service that feels belittled in a sense when we think of the worldly way of doing it. In Matthew 23:11 and 12, and we would start earlier in that chapter, we have the Pharisees who took their religious position and got the whole idea of leadership completely backwards and messed up. We'll not unravel all of that right now. But at verse 11, after exposing the Pharisees and many of their problems, Christ said simply, the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. Doesn't take much more than a kindergarten education to understand what Christ is talking about there. It does turn the things upside down. And what happens is the world tries to creep into religion and flip things over also and try to bring its own values into the religious community and has well succeeded in many, many cases. But the model of Christ was for the Creator of all to kneel and serve other people. Paul would say that he was a bondservant, 2 Corinthians 4 and 5, and he wasn't ashamed of being a bondservant. Now, the challenge for you and I is that bondservant simply is not a term that you and I use. 2 Corinthians 4:5. For we do not preach ourselves, but Christ Jesus as Lord, and ourselves as your bondservants for Jesus' sake. Bondservant was the lowest form of servant they had. That was the one on the bottom of the totem pole, the bottom of the ladder, the nastiest, dirtiest jobs that no one wanted to do. That's the guy that got to do them. That was his job or her job. And notice also Paul said that he was a bondservant. Again, the term kind of misses us a little bit. But he said for Jesus' sake. I think there's some depth there. He was not their bondservant to serve their personal agendas. He was not there to do their job for them, to do their responsibilities for them, to make their life easier so they could sit back and live the good life while Paul did all the hard work. What he did was for Jesus' sake. He was serving on a spiritual level. And while I will agree that the spiritual service and the physical may absolutely overlap at times, the focus always was on the spiritual welfare of the people that he served. And Paul was not ashamed to humble himself and serve. So leadership, it's like kneeling into humble service. It is going to those places other people don't want to go because they are unpleasant and they are kind of messy at times and you really would rather just not have to deal with it. Let's let somebody else deal with it. But as servants of Christ, when we can bring someone to a spiritual understanding, we serve. So we have our proper order. Would you rather serve or would you rather be served? Now, a lot of folks go, well, everybody wants to be served. And I think that's probably pretty popular. But also there are people who are really uncomfortable being served. All of us know people who are out there doing stuff and they're eager to help other people. But when they themselves get in a bind, one of the first things that comes out of their mouth is, oh, I don't want to bother anybody. And they start kind of getting low and laying out of the way. And there's a lot of psychology behind that. We won't try to unravel it other than to say this, and this is not the complete psychological picture of it. But I think some people feel comfortable serving because when they are doing the service, They're the one doing. And to say that they're in charge may be a little overstating it, but they do have a matter of control, and there's just this giving that flows out so much easier. When you're on the receiving end, you're the vulnerable, and you don't have that control. And you do have to face some things that, well, what if nobody wants to serve me? What if nobody wants to help me out here? Maybe I ought to just hide over here in the shadow in case I find out I'm not as liked as well as much as I think I am. The idea of opening yourself up in vulnerability to being served is an uncomfortable place to be. And it's not just among Christians. You can study study this idea across the secular area also. And there are a lot of people who, when they're in need, they just won't call you. Now, one researcher says if you want to know who your real friends are, look who calls you when they're in need. Because they're exposing themselves at their weakest, and they're saying, I trust you enough to open up to you at this weak point in my life. Now, again, I need to not ramble off in that area, but I find it rather fascinating. But first, we have to be served by Christ, cleansed. We have to have Titus 3:5, the washing of regeneration, before we can serve. We don't get to serve just on our terms and do it in our ways. First, Christ serves us by washing us. If you need a little more clarification, washing us in His blood to wash our sins away, then we are on board the team, and on board the team, now we get to serve. But we don't get to serve before we have been served. Thus He would say to Peter, if I don't wash your feet, you have nothing to do with me. Of course, Peter, impetuous Peter as he's called, went the whole opposite way and said, well, not just my feet, give me a bath, right? And he gets things a little mixed up there. The washing that we're looking at is not cosmetic. I want to use the Psalms 51 and 10, where David appeals to the heart. That's really where the change has to occur. We can make some surface level changes and we can fake people out, but that's not what we want to do. So David would say, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Or Paul would say in the 2 Corinthian letter, you are a new creation. Or Peter would say over Peter 3, right around verse 21 there, he'd say it's not the washing of the body, but the appeal of a good conscience. And that's what we're looking at. We're trying to get past just physical activity. We can force ourselves to go through any robotic set of motions and our heart not be in it. What we're looking for is to getting our heart in it so that when we do kneel to serve, it is a passion, it is a desire, it is a hunger, it is a joy. It is not a, well, I got to do this or I'm going to be lost forever. Don't want that kind of attitude. And getting into those internal places and really addressing the internal issues are really, really, really hard. That is the straight and narrow that few people find. Most people want to say, well, it's Washington's fault. It's my mom and daddy's fault. It's my second grade teacher's fault. It's that boyfriend, girlfriend that dumped me back in the 7th grade. It's their fault. Everybody's got somebody to point to, and yet all of these people playing the victim game, avoiding going inside where the real issues are, haven't figured out yet that that's not working. And it's so profoundly simple. If that worked, to point the finger of blame at other people, and some of those people are guilty, we won't argue that for a second, but if that worked, then why are you not enjoying your happiest life ever? Why are you not at the pinnacle of joy, just reveling in happiness and bliss that people can't even understand? And that is simply because until we get into our own heart and address our own fears and our own insecurities and our own dislikes of ourselves, our own fears of rejection because we rejected ourselves, until we get there and wrestle with all of that, Pointing the blame at somebody else is never ever going to fix anything. And if that were going to fix anything, you would be on top of the world right now. Let me ask you, are you on top of the world right now? Do you own it? Everything just percolating exactly the way you want it. There's nothing you need to change. Well, why not? You blamed everybody under the moon, under the sun. I've done it too. And at some point you go, that's not working, is it? Guess I need to own that. Father, create in me a clean heart, a steadfast spirit. And he's not going to do that against my cooperation. He's only going to do it with my cooperation. So we have to give Jesus access to what I call here the secret dirt. We have to let him inside those places that nobody else is ever going to know but you and him. And that's kind of tough. So before you can really, really, really serve and understand the depths and the joy of serving that Christ had, first you have to be served. I want you to look at little things. Look at the little places where the dirt sneaks in on us. John 13:10, of course, Peter just had some dirty feet. And let me do just a real brief on that. You and I are talking about foot washing. We're like, I don't really get it. Well, that's because you and I don't walk everywhere we go. We don't wear sandals that strap over our bare feet everywhere we go. And we don't walk dirty, dusty streets everywhere we go and end up sweating or stepping in mud puddles or whatever. And when we get someplace, we have dirty feet. You know, we've got on our $200 shoes, our $100 shoes. We got on our favorite socks. We've got our slacks or whatever that covers all the way down to our ankles. And then we get into our air-conditioned vehicle and we hop in and we travel, and we've left our air-conditioned house to our air-conditioned vehicle, and we drove down a nice paved road. Well, some of them are nice paved roads. And we got to where we went, and we got back into an air-conditioned place. And if somebody were to go, hey, do you need to wash your feet? We'd go, you're weird. It just wouldn't click, would it? But if they said to us before we had a meal, do you want to wash your hands? You'd go, yeah, thanks, I do need to do that. We'd immediately get it. A better example for you and I is just the idea of washing our hands than washing our feet. And though it isn't an exact parallel, let's leave it there for right now. And so Peter wasn't soiled completely. He just had a little dirt sneak in on him. Why does that happen? Because we're living in the real world, and some dirt's going to sneak in on you. I wish you could bat 1,000. I wish you could walk through and stay pristine, clean all the time. But James 3:2 tells me we stumble in many things. It's going to happen. And when it happens, you've got to have the honesty with yourself to recognize it and go to Jesus to be cleaned. 1 John 1:9, if you would. So James 2:10, he tells us if you keep the whole law and you stumble in one point, you're guilty of all. I do want to turn to 2 Peter 3:14. Because this is the goal. And I'm going to briefly touch on how we missed the goal. Our goal is often more of a Revelation 3:1 goal. I want people to think I'm good. That is not the goal. That's the wrong goal. I want people to think I got it together. Sorry, wrong goal. James 2:10, I keep the whole law, stumble one point, I'm guilty of all. My goal is not to fake somebody else out. But Peter would say it this way. Therefore, beloved, since you look for these things, be diligent to be found by him in peace, spotless and blameless. Now, who do I want to be found by and be spotless and blameless? Not you. Him. If I'm not found in him, spotless and blameless, your opinion doesn't matter, and vice versa. My opinion of you doesn't matter. If God sees you when you step before the judgment seat of Christ and he sees spots and he sees blame that I did not see, and I say, oh, but that was the best brother in Christ. That was one of the best sisters in Christ I had ever knew in all of my X number of years of preaching. God's simply going to say, you didn't see what I saw. And the goal was not to please the preacher. The goal was to be found in him, spotless and blameless. That's pretty tough. That takes it to a whole nother level, doesn't it? So this isn't one of those balance sheet things where you go, well, I did one good. Man, I did a really good whatever, and it was good. You know, you don't want to take somebody's credit away. So somebody did X, Y, and Z last week, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, and it was really phenomenally good. And if they hadn't have done it, things would have went down a whole different path, and we're grateful for what they did many, many, many years, weeks, months later on. That's great. But you don't get to take that good set and go, but over here, I did some bad things. But when you put it on the scale, it all balances out. It doesn't work that way. I tease about my prison volunteer. I had to quit using this joke because most people don't even get it anymore. I said I'm saving up my S&H green stamp so I can do the crime of my choice later on. I'm doing my time on installments, and then when I finally get to court, I go, yeah, but I've already done 30 years. And so they're going to let me off. Doesn't work that way, does it? The judge isn't going to go, oh, well, you've been volunteering for a long time. You get by with your crime. Sorry. But that's the way people think. Now, wait a minute. How many of you remember what S&H green stamps were? How many of you go on S&H what? How many of you went with your mama to the S&H green stamp store and she'd be opening up the books and yeah. Okay, young people, later on, ask at lunch. It was a real thing. 1 Corinthians 10:31. The ordinary stuff counts. Just the most ordinary of ordinary. 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whether then you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. That's it, everything. It all counts. There's nothing that doesn't count. So what are the small, unwashed corners of your life? That's maybe just between you and God, but those are the things that count. Again, we're going to stay on small a little bit, but these are eternal. So you've got your heroic and your bold moments. They're impressive. Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. That's impressive because who he was, but foot washing was a very common practice in his day. So our service is not measured by the amount of applause we get or how much people look at us and go, ooh, look at what they did. I want you to focus on serving in the ordinary, daily, mundane things of life. And it's kind of hard to put it into words because it's ordinary, mundane. If this is mama chasing a kid, wiping a snotty nose, that's a service our community needs. And you can raise that child as in the knowledge, admonition of the Lord, nurture and admonition of the Lord. And that's part of it. Folding the laundry, that's part of it. Running errands, that's part of it. Picking up your socks, putting them in the hamper, part of it. Cleaning up the sink after you shave, that's part of it. I'm really, really trying to get down to the lowest, simplest, mundane level because he says, whatever you do, let me look at that verse again, be sure I got that right. Whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. That's where our greatness comes in. Colossians 3:23, it says the same thing. That was to the servants. And he was telling them to do their work as they were doing it unto the Lord. Let's double check that. Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you'll receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. This gets a little hard to see though, doesn't it? So Ephesians 5 would tell me to love my wife as Christ loved the church. That means there are certain things that a good husband ought to be doing, right? But I'm not primarily honoring my wife. I'm primarily honoring the Lord. She's secondary. And from her perspective, I'm secondary. And as we're dealing with our kids or grandkids, they're secondary. The first consideration is the Lord whom we serve. Matthew 6:3 and 4. We're not going to go around boasting about it and trying to make everybody see, ooh, look how great we are. We're going to just do what we do. When you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. That's what we're wanting. So don't discredit the small things. I'd like to talk a little bit more about Matthew 12, but I'm starting to run out of time, so I won't. But that's where he said we'll give an account of every idle word that we speak, and by our words we'll be justified, by our words we'll be condemned. If every idle word counts, then it follows that every action also counts. Nothing is insignificant. So we embrace that path that few people ever notice. And we learn to serve in the small things. Just serve in the little things. And if you can serve in the little things and get your groove there, then if a big thing comes up, you'll be fine. You'll do okay. Find joy in the hidden way. Where are true blessings found? Well, they're certainly not here on earth. We're going to give all of this up. So they're really found in knowing and doing, which he says there in John 13:17. He says, if you know those things and do them. Let me look at verse 17 quickly. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. It didn't say you're blessed if you know them. It said you're blessed if you do them. So modern culture, it's all about getting out there, getting your bling, getting your platform, getting your likes, your followers, and all that sort of thing, fitting into whatever the little current standard is that you associate with. And there's the bigger one, and there are subcultural ones, They're just all kinds of little groups that get together and do what they do. And, I'm not saying it's wrong to fit into your little subculture group in every case. But the real joy, the real depth, the real serving, that's the biblical idea. James pointed out to doing good. He said, don't be hearers only, but be doers of the word. And that's what we got to do. So why is it so hard to do that? I mean, the lesson and the concept, let's go to Galatians chapter 6. The concept is real easy to put on the table. But when it comes to implementation, it's a whole different ballgame. I think here in Galatians 6, we get a little idea of why this is challenging for us, and we'll use verse 9 and 10. He said, let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. Did you catch it? That's the tough part. It's in due time. You see, somebody comes to the preacher and says, our marriage is struggling. I want some help, preacher. You got to give me an answer. And the preacher knows he can't do it because he knows what he's hearing is you need to give me the one short sentence that I can open my mouth, I can speak it. Everything changes and my marriage is transformed by the time we walk out of this office in 30 minutes. Has never, ever happened, will never, ever happen. The transition to taking a marriage that is struggling and turning it into one of those where you said, I wouldn't have any other way, this is awesome, may take 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, and that works with other relationships too. And it takes a lot of work and it's hard. Most people don't want to do that. They want a quick, easy answer, so it feels like I'm losing. And it feels like it's so far away. How will I ever get there? You're going to get there. We just don't know when, do we? So we learn to find joy in doing good for the sake of doing good. And he smiles. And all becomes well. So we walk in his footsteps. It takes faith to follow Jesus. It takes faith to look beyond the flesh that is so hard to see beyond and go, he knew what he was doing. He had it figured out. I hadn't got it figured out. And says, I know I don't have it figured out on my own. Why in the world would I want to keep doing what I used to do? That's crazy. Isn't that the definition of insanity? It traces all the way back to Einstein. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. It just it's not going to work. So if what I had done didn't work, let me get on board with Jesus. Let me look for those little daily opportunities. Again, nothing big and fantastic. Just the little bitty things that nobody else cares about, except the person that you helped out perhaps. And see it as investing in heaven. That's what you're doing. And keep focusing on doing those little things. And in focusing on doing the little things, you're washing feet. You're following the heart and example of Jesus. Last slide. No ordinary act, not a single ordinary act remains ordinary when it's done as unto the Lord. And you get your head around that, then you've got your head around something that's going to change the course of your life. If you are subject to our public invitation, our baptistry is ready. We're here to help however we can. While together we stand and sing.